Hi there, dear friends. This is Bob Hatton. This is the Encourager. Unfortunately, I've had to retreat back inside today because the weather isn't very good. But anyway, let's not worry about that. Let's open our Bibles. Let's go to the book of Deuteronomy and continue with our studies. We are now into chapter 4. And yesterday we finished as Moses was praying to the Lord. Deuteronomy starts when Moses is speaking to the people, this new generation, this generation that's going to go in and going to inherit what God has promised Israel. He's talking to them, he's preaching to them, he's getting them ready to go into the promised land. And this first bit is kind of a narrative that he gives them. He tells them about the old generation. And by the way, it's nothing to do with being old or being young. It's just the attitude that we have of belonging to this older generation that failed, or this new generation that took the promise of God and got a hold of their inheritance. It's nothing to do with whether you're old or young, and it's about our attitude. And so let's be part of this young generation and move forward to take that which God wants to give to us. And the title for this talk this morning is Seeing the Invisible God. And I've taken that from Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 27. That's the New Testament. But the New Testament gives us a short summary of Moses' life. And this is what it speaks about him and all the ups and downs that he went through. He could go through all this because he could see the invisible God. And that's something that kept Moses on course all through these many years that he lived. 120 years old he was when he died. That's about his age as he's getting Israel, this new generation, ready to move into the inheritance. He's seen many things, he's experienced many things. There's a lot of reason why he should have been discouraged, but he could see the invisible God, and that kept him on course. And that's what he's trying to tell the Israelites in this second sermon that he holds. Get a hold of this God. He wants to tell them about the character of God. He wants to tell them who God is, what God has said, and what God has done. And these three things are very important for us. And Moses, he kept his eye on the invisible God. But as the former generation approached the border to the promised land, they didn't know where to look. They didn't know how to get a glimpse of this invisible God. And of course, Hebrews chapter 11, what that tells us, that mentions this thing about the invisible God, is the chapter about faith. By faith, Moses saw the invisible God. By faith, we can see the invisible God. But the Israelites, they didn't know. This former generation didn't know where to look. They just could have looked outwards and they would have seen him. They would have got a glimpse of him. But instead of that, they looked forward. Now, normally looking forward is a good thing. But when they looked forward, they saw the big grapes. They heard the message of the valley of Eshcol and so on. But besides seeing the grapes, they saw something that was much bigger. And that was the giants that Anak lived in that country. That was the fortified cities and the very strong armies. They knew all about them and they were concentrating on them instead of the invisible God. And the next thing that they looked at around them. They looked at what they could do. They looked at their own abilities. They looked at their own resources and they realized, we are lacking. We don't have any weaponry. We don't have anything that with which we can fight against the Canaanites. We don't have any weapons, but we don't have any experience. We're not soldiers. We are shepherds. We're wanderers. We've been wandering through the desert for the last they weren't, but we were slaves. We'd just come out of Egypt. So who are we? Who are we? And then they started to look inside of themselves. And what could they see there? They could see fear. They were so afraid of what could go wrong, so afraid of everything. And the last thing, they looked behind them and they were thinking maybe we should go back to Egypt. Perhaps it wasn't a good idea of leaving the security of our slavery. We knew what was going to happen every day, instead of going on to this adventure with Moses and this talk about the promised land. And, they even said, well, this God, he hates us. That's what they said. They said God hates us and he's brought us into the desert to kill us. Well, this upset Moses, and he wanted to make sure that the new generation knew who God is, knew what he'd said, and knew what he'd done. So that's why he's talking about this. And along my career in church and as a church leader, I've heard many times when God has given us a word and was going to propel us forward, got us to go into a new season or something, there were always the voices that said, no, we can't do that. This step is too big for us. We're only a small church. We don't have enough resources, and so on and so forth. Instead of looking at the invisible God and realizing that he has got everything for us. And so this is where Moses starts now. He wants to tell the Israelites about who this God is, so that they can go take the next steps with great confidence. And in the book of Daniel is one of the last books of the Old Testament. It's a prophetic book, and Daniel describes somebody there in the end times. I think this is about the end times, and this person will arise, and he will be very dangerous. He'll be like a world dictator. He will make the church and the saints, the people of God, he will give them a lot of trouble, a lot of hassle. But then there's a statement there. It says the people who know their God will be strong, and they will do great deeds. They will do valiant deeds, and that is something that is very, very exciting. So Moses wants to make sure that this new generation knows who this God is, knows what he said, and knows what he's done. And that's why he starts this second sermon. And what he tells them is that God is a very generous giver, that God is a sovereign Lord, that God is a merciful deliverer, and he is an incomparable lover. And so as we come into the next week, these are the things I want to talk about with you, and we're going to have a look at some of the more attributes. We've already seen quite a lot, but it's important that we know who this God is, that we begin to see the one who is invisible, the one who is not possible to see, but then we do see him through faith. We know who he is, we know what he said, and we know what he's done. So I'm looking forward to that, so don't miss it. I'll see you next week. God bless. Your encourager, your Bob Hatton.